Welcome folks to Toowoomba Forward. My name's Tim Entwistle and joining me is another Tim McMahon. How you going, Tim?
Good, mate. Thanks for having me.
No, great to have you. Yes, this is your second term that you're running for council.
It is, yeah.
You're elected in 2020. But for those people who might not know you yet, could you please just introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your background, and tell us about the qualities that you possess that you believe will make you an effective councillor for the next 4 years.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me. 2020, I was a school teacher. I had a great career of about 12 years and really thought, I love our city. I love where we're going. I'd love to be a voice around the table. I'd love to be a part of it, and stuck up my hand in 2020 to become a councillor, was elected, and 4 years later, I've enjoyed it enough to go again. I was, at that stage, father of 3 kids, up to 4 now.
Oh, still going.
I thought 4's a good number for me, but my wife maybe asked her that. And I have really enjoyed it. It's a challenging role that I really love, that I really enjoy, and looking forward to going again. So the second part of your question was, what qualities do I possess to make myself a good councillor? And it's a really interesting question, Tim, because well, it varies on who you ask, but for me, there's a few qualities that you really need. The first one is you need to be able to clearly communicate who you are, what you believe, what you want to say. And I suppose, hopefully now I'm doing a decent job at that, but it is a skill that I've learnt over 4 years. I thought I was a good communicator before, but to be able to say very clearly where you're going and what you're doing is a huge skill. I think you need a general level of IQ and EQ, and when you look at the job of councillor, what is it? It's basically, there's an organisation with an $800 million budget, and you've got to be able to sit around the boardroom for that. That's what the job of council is in Toowoomba. We have a large business, and there's a lot of complex financial documents, terms, that kind of stuff, legal advice, that you've got to be able to get your head around, right? And so you do need a general level of ability to learn and retain a lot of information to be able to do that, and I think I've again learnt how to do that in droves. But to me, so we live in an environment where there's 11 people around there, 10 councillors and mayor. 6 votes is key. 6 votes is anything you want, because that's a majority. You really need to be able to build a relationship, Tim, with the people around the table with you. And I think we actually see all the time, especially in elections, I'll do this, I'll fix this. It's not an individual job, Tim, it's a group. There's 11 of us, and to be able to form relationships that are professional and that work around the table is, to me, the most important skill. And I've actually done a video about it on my personals, on my socials, but that ability is huge for a councillor. It's not I'll do this, it's working as a team, working with a heck of a lot of council staff, consulting with a lot of members of the community, and of course the people around the table. So that's what I think are 3 really important skills that you need for this job.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. In the last local government election, you finished 10th. You made it into the top 10 as the council candidates, which did secure you in that place with 3.77% of the vote.
Well done.
Yeah,
You've done
did my research. I know. That was actually a very decent gap between the 11th place candidate, which finished on 2.94. So that's a decent couple thousand people who...
7,000.
7,000.
Between
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
You got it. So what would you attribute your success to in 2020 to secure that spot? But also, what are you going to be doing in 2024 to make sure, because as strong of a gap as that was, it was still the 10th spot. So what are you doing to hopefully maybe get into the 9th, 8th or 7th, or secure that spot again this year?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tim, and acknowledging you ran in 2020.
Yeah.
And I've always thought you and I got along pretty well, and I acknowledge your work, and I think... So that was my first go at election. I worked hard. I worked really hard in that. And I'm not saying people that didn't get elected didn't work hard, but it was driving around for months on end, having a coffee with anyone who would. It requires a lot of name recognition. It unfortunately, politics requires a lot of money, and I was kind of at the lower end of how much I spent. But really getting around, meeting people, knowing the issues of Toowoomba Region is what got me elected. And when you say, what are you going to do different this time? I still think it's absolutely important to be engaging with constituents on a regular basis, the good ones and the bad ones. And when you're a sitting councillor, there are some not nice conversations fairly regularly. You have to have a grasp on the issues that are facing Toowoomba Region. And when you say, what am I going to do different? Well, I suppose since I got in, I've been having catch-ups with anyone who'll have me, and I've been working hard every day for 4 years and really getting to know who are the people in our community, what are the issues that they need sorted, and seeing how I can help. And it's a frustrating one, Tim. You can't necessarily be a fixer because a lot of issues take time to work through. And I go into bat on issues all the time, right? But I think to resolve issues, it requires money and time. And I often have the conversation in council, I could do a heck of a lot more if you give us more time and more money, but you've still got to be able to have a grasp on the issues that matter, not to the squeaky wheels, but to the everyday quiet person who's happy to raise their kids in suburbia and Toowoomba, and I think that's a huge ability.
Yeah, cool. So in those conversations that you've been having now in your 4 years as a councillor, and even in these past few months where you've been campaigning, if you could pick just one issue that you've been hearing the most from from ratepayers and from locals across the community, what is that, and what are you hoping to sort of address, and how are you hoping to address it?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. It's hard to do one because I will say there are a lot of issues that the ratepayer or the voter is having an issue with. The top issue, and it's not sexy politics, but it's the truth. And the top issue is council's taking this amount of money from me. What am I seeing in return when I'm living at home, living in an environment where my rent or mortgage is going through the roof and I'm struggling to put bread on the table? And that's got to be the biggest issue. And
the transparency between...
I pay rates. Tim, where is it going? And for me to be able to communicate, look, this is where council's money goes, that you pay in your rates, and we get a little bit from external like state and federal, but most of it it's a ratepayer funded budget, and where does that get spent? And when you say things like, I'd love to have this in Toowoomba, and I usually say I'd love to have that too, but it's $100 million that I don't have.
Yeah.
And when you think about a business of council, most of the rate base goes to things like when you turn on your tap, water comes out, like the garbage man that shows up to collect your bin. And I know roads are one of the topics that people say are not good enough, but we're still dealing with a backlog of flood recovery from several years ago. So just to be able to alliterate, this is where the money's coming in and this is where it's going out in an $800 million business like council, that the ratepayer sees value for money and transparency in, has got to be at all times, not just now, the number one issue. That's coupled with a lot of issues that council can't necessarily control. Your mortgage has gone up, your electricity's gone through the roof. Every bill that the average household has is going up 30-40%.
So can I ask so you've identified that it's transparency that ratepayers and locals are concerned about, where they're saying, where's my money being spent? Do you see regular letters coming out explaining where the money's going? Is there some sort of education or information initiative that you'd be interested in pursuing to sort of alleviate that issue or to help people see the value of it?
Look, it's I mean, if I'm I suppose fairly involved in politics, when the average person looks at a budget of any business or federal or state or local politics, to be able to see where the money's going to come, it's not always a one-line spreadsheet. We have all of our meetings in public which say where they're going, and like I said, it is complex. But I think certainly brought along for the journey that we're saying, hey, this is the rate base, this is how far it's going, and do we need to look at levels of service in things like how often we mow the grass in the parks? And I know that's a huge issue, but it's more having the conversation and bringing the community along with the journey. I work for the people, not for council. Yeah, I think it's a huge.
So you would basically promote, because that's the thing I'm trying to get into, is that you've identified that this is a problem, that people don't understand the value and they don't see where the money's going, and maybe there's a set of intangibles that they can't really put their finger on. Obviously, we have the all decisions are made in public, like you identified. People can go whenever they want to see where the budget's going, where the money's being spent. It's freely accessible online. That's still not enough though, for some reason. For you're hearing this from people, they're saying, I'm still not seeing it, I'm still not seeing it. Is this a public awareness campaign you're thinking about, or are you looking at doing things like mowing the lawn more frequently or that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like, as far as, do we want to run a town hall and invite everyone to come and say this is where the money's going? Look, I'm happy to do those things. Whether or not, when you talk about things like finances, they are well attended is another issue. But and I agree with you, it is a massive issue that the community wants to know, where does the money go? In the state of play at Queensland right now, Tim, more than, and I think the number, I won't give you the exact number, more than 60% of councils across Queensland are facing a situation where they're in dire financial straits and they're on a path to decline. Now, Toowoomba Region isn't one of them, because we have a huge team of prudent financial management, and it's going to stay that way. And I would hate if it turned into a case where we weren't able to balance the books and we were going backwards. So I'm very happy to have the conversation. I'm happy to do town halls. Around what levels of service do we need to have. Like, I mean, most of the money goes into water. We can't change that. But do I open the libraries a few more days here or close that? And every decision we make has that in mind.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, it is a big issue.
No, great. Thank you for that. So we wanted to talk about political party affiliations.
Sure.
On the ECQ website, you've declared your affiliation with the Liberal Nationals Party. I
am.
But you've chosen to run as independent. What guarantees can you offer to the Toowoomba region that you will remain independent and represent them independently? We have a state government election coming up soon. There's a 50-50 chance that the Liberal Nationals Party could take power in Queensland in just a few months. What are you doing to remain impartial in those sorts of decisions, especially when interacting with state government?
Yeah. I'll not comment on a state government election. They can worry about that. I'm running the local election, and that's my issue. And it's a great question. I've always been impartial. I've never been questioned as otherwise. And if it's a Labor Party Premier, I'll continue to work with them as I've always done. We do get some ministers coming up here, and whenever they're here, I'll have the same conversation with them as anyone else. But it kind of seems like the job of a local council. You have to be able to build your relationship with state and federal.
Yep.
When we talk about money and more coming from the state and feds, that's the conversation I'm having with the mayor. We need to be more actively working with our state and federal colleagues, and I'll do it no matter who they are.
Yeah, great.
So that's all I have to say on that.
No, thank you.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah. So housing affordability and availability of homes to rent is a major issue that residents are concerned about. It is true that this is actually a multi-level of government issue to tackle, both federal, state and local. In terms of approving new subdivisions and town planning, what do you think the role of council has to play in that, in order to open up more homes for people to purchase, live in, spend time in? And also touch briefly on the idea of supporting high density living in the Toowoomba CBD.
Sure. Mate, we got a half an hour interview and I could talk about this all day, but I'm happy to give you my thoughts. We need new houses. We are growing. We've got people living in tents. Most cities in Queensland and Australia are the same. So we need to be forward focused on that. The thing is, at present, the state government's come out and said you will have this many more houses. Now, there is going to be, Tim, 30,000 more houses in Toowoomba Region in the next 20 years. Okay? We need to look at, and it's a huge count list of where are they going to go. Okay? What do we want our region to look like? Now, when it comes for housing choice, it's a very good question, and the answer, I suppose, is for someone on council, we have to look at all housing choices. Okay, for me, a large family, we need to look at more larger houses on bigger blocks. The biggest level of homelessness in Toowoomba Region is the same as Australia, and that's single women over 50. Now, they don't want a large house on acreage. They want a really cool, small house in probably a community in a higher density where they've got shops and amenities within a small distance that they're happy to walk to. So we need to encourage multi-duplexes and multi-house buildings, the same as we need to encourage larger. All right? if we're not going to get any more land because we're going to go infill, we're going to have to go up. And I support that. So when you say, are you in favour of this or that, I'm in favour of both. My biggest thing is, where do we put them? Right out the back of Toowoomba, where there's little public transport, little ability for someone to get into the city, I don't support high density, high rise public housing. In the city, there's so many proposals for that to happen, and I'm all for it. So I suppose the brief way of looking at it is larger blocks out there, infill up, higher density development in Toowoomba City. And it's a really good question over what do we want our region to look like in 30 years. We are on the cusp of being a really large, thriving city.
Yeah.
And we've got to look at places for people to live so that they've got all of their amenities. Like, what if you don't need a car because you live in a high rise in Toowoomba City and all of the things you need are within walking distance? That's pretty cool, right? So whatever your family stage of life is and whatever style of house you want, I would like to think we offer it. But it's not a free-for-all. You've got to put the right ones in the right place.
Good, thank you. And we'll circle back on that question, because I think that's very important, just in a couple of questions' time. I want to take a second to talk about sustainability and responsibly managing the environment. It's top of mind for many Toowoomba Region residents. And so I want to know, what are your convictions in regards to climate change and whether or not council has a role to play in it?
All right, that's a lot of questions in that question. I'll break it down one at a time.
Sure.
Is climate change a thing? Is it an issue? Absolutely. Does council have a role to play in it? Absolutely. And here's how. Let's talk specifics, right? What the data says is that the way the climate is changing in Toowoomba is that we are going to have hotter summers, and then when it rains, we're going to have a heck of a lot more rain fall at a shorter period of time. Now, I know today that you and I are recording, if you can see, it's been a drizzle all day.
Yeah.
But in general, we're getting higher amounts of rain in shorter amounts of time. This means when it rains for 3 hours and your tank's full in the first hour, and for 2 hours it's literally washing away, we need to increase things like rainwater harvesting in line with how the climate is changing. Right? That's one specific example that I think council has a huge role to play. Where does our water come from? We can't make any more. So what are we doing to increase new water sources, whatever that looks like, in line for longer periods of dry that are being predicted? Are we building our houses in a local level in more resilience to things like bushfires and climate variation? So I suppose on the whole climate thing, there is some really good evidence-based stuff. I've been the environment guy for 4 years. I've looked at native species and the role that we're having and the role that the climate's having on them, and there's some alarm bells there. And some of the species that thrive are the introduced ones that we don't want here. They're all huge issues that council's dealing with. So we have some really good evidence-based facts on the table now that says this is time to act. I suppose personally, I welcome fact-based knowledge and I welcome that information. I suppose there's climate change and there's climate change, Tim, and I'm not one of those, we need to turn off our aircon and stop using a fridge and enjoy the qualities of life that we have because carbon emissions. I think the average person should still live with the luxuries that they want. Am I in favour of renewables in the mix? Absolutely. Am I in favour of electric vehicles? Absolutely. But yeah, there's a lot of big issues that are around the whole climate change as an idea. Some of them I feel are over politicised, and then we have evidence-based facts, and I'm happy to work on them. Yeah,
great. Thank you for that. So that's probably consistent with this follow-up question, because I wanted to ask you, in principle, and strictly in principle, do you support the use of travel restrictions on Toowoomba Region residents as a means to reduce carbon emissions? So for an example, limiting residents' ability to travel outside of their suburb.
That's about the dumbest idea I've ever heard. I do not support any travel restrictions. I'm very aware that there's a whole idea of that 15-minute cities are bad. The idea of 15-minute cities is there if you want it because it's convenient. There is nothing in council hindering travel, and I will never support such an idea that says you can't travel here to reduce carbon.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that.
Please allow me to be crystal clear.
Yeah. Awesome. So just switching gears to the topic of crime, which is another thing that's on the hearts and minds of a lot of ratepayers that we've talked to so far. Again, this is another one of those issues that has state and federal responsibilities, but on a council level, we want residents to feel safe in their neighbourhoods, feel safe in their communities, and continue to keep the region being a great place to raise a family, to settle down, to start a business, all this stuff that can't really happen unless crime is under control. So in regards to the response and the responsibility that council has, what do you think is there, and how do you think that council could promote a safer city?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Tim. It's a bit harder. And I suppose that it's got to go back to we know that the state government controls crime. They work with the police, they work with the justice system, they work with early intervention, that whole deal. Every dollar it has comes from state government and none from council. Now, if we're the ones who are tasked with water rates and rubbish and we're sticking money into crime, is that a good outcome for the residents? I think most would say, you guys stick with what you're supposed to do, and the state government needs to stick with what they're supposed to do. So there's got to be a level of advocacy from us to say, state government, we need you to put us on the map as far as what you're doing with crime prevention. I'm of the opinion that it's been a bit haphazard, a bit inadequate to overall. We're still seeing some of the same issues, right? So I suppose I don't support spending a lot of ratepayer money on an issue that another level of government is perfectly funded to do. Right? When we start getting into that's I think bad governance. I know everyone wants to say, oh, council's running for this. It's not our playground, right? What can we do? We have things like cameras that we can put in high traffic areas, high crime areas. We encourage things like neighbourhood watch. We encourage things like community groups, and that is council business. But whilst I'm as aware as anyone that crime's an issue, Tim, I really think that we need to talk better with our state government counterparts on what they're doing with their issue and hold them to account on a state government issue.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned cameras, the idea of using cameras in high traffic areas. Would you support putting facial recognition cameras and security cameras in residential neighbourhoods and residential streets?
We don't have facial recognition cameras in Toowoomba Region. There's no plan to bring them in. That's it.
Yeah. And so let's say hypothetically they weren't facial recognition cameras, but would you bring them out into suburbs, like just regular cameras?
So cameras that aren't facial recognition in suburbs, we have that already.
Yes, but I mean like expanding it further.
Well, what do you mean by expanding? More cameras or?
Yeah, like the availability of cameras on
Look, what we have at present, Tim, and this is the nitty-gritty of council, we have movable cameras that we can put in places of high hotspot. Now, any potential criminal knows I just walk around it and the camera doesn't. So they're of limited effect in dealing with crime. But we do have them at our disposal, not many that we can use wherever they're needed. Look, I'm not in favour of an over-surveillance society, but I am in favour of using cameras that tell if a crime is happening or a traffic infringement or otherwise where they're needed.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think you're alluding to more of a identity. We're not in the business of getting your facts and your facial recognition and putting in a database and tracking movements and all that. Everyone says, what's council? I'm in council. That doesn't happen. Yeah. Right? And I don't see any plans for it to happen.
Okay, great. Good to know. I wanted to, just last few questions, just talk briefly about the Toowoomba region as a region into the future over the next few years. Residents have raised their concerns about rich traditions being sacrificed for bold ambitions. These concerns were actually highlighted just recently during the discussion about the Berghofer Stadium upgrades, which would necessitate the demolition of a 131-year-old tennis club. No, it wouldn't at all.
No, we didn't vote on.
No. So to be clear, I'm saying that the question is phrased that were highlighted with the discussion. So I'm not saying that you'd voted on that. And this could be a great chance for you to clear that up for voters as well. So I just want to know, what are your thoughts on that specific example? But I also wanted to branch out more briefly to talk about how do we preserve the beauty or the culture, the architecture, and the essence, if you will, of the Toowoomba region while moving forward into the future.
great question. Very happy to answer it. I'll come back to the stadium, but I'll answer more generally. We're growing at an alarming rate. We need houses, as I said before.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to see is 20 years, you go to a nice vista and look west, and it's urban sprawl and rooftops as far as you can see, right? So we need to make sure we manage growth, houses to make sure they're put in the right place, and it looks like it should. And I'm very happy. It's very council jargon, but we are doing a new planning scheme that makes sure while we grow, we protect things like vistas, higher produce agricultural land. We're not going to bulldoze every farm and put a house on it. That's bad governance, and we're not in for it, right? So we need to make sure, absolutely, that the city that we're building is in a really good spot in 30 years. So that's the bold ambitions. We are growing. On that, if you're living in one of the 20,000 new houses here, you make sure you turn the tap on and there's water connected. That's where most of the ratepayer dollars got to be spent. Right, so as far as bold ambitions, we also have something pretty special here. We have a city, we have farming areas, we have small towns, and we have rich traditions that do need to be protected. So as far as that whole saying, I back it 100%. As far as Olympics, what we voted on this last week in council concerned legacy, and I would argue that the rhetoric on that has delved into the details that we otherwise didn't. It's not about location of a stadium, it's about legacy of infrastructure from the Olympics, right? And the question posed to councillors last week is, if we bought Olympic legacy infrastructure here, would the city benefit from it, right? And talk about where we've been and where we're going. I absolutely voted in favour that I think Olympic legacy would benefit our city. When we start looking at things like a quarantine facility for horses for the Olympics, this is huge. We have a huge rural sector. Horse is huge. Horse racing, horse associated businesses are huge in Toowoomba Region. That would benefit us, right? When we look at the idea of a stadium, again talking legacy, Tim, not location, would it work for us to have bigger sporting matches here in Toowoomba Region? What about if we look at a Suncorp Stadium style thing in Brisbane, and what that's done? And if the state government is willing to put $90 million of infrastructure into our community because of it, would we welcome the legacy? So I voted absolutely in favour of that legacy. Now, that's what we voted on, Tim. Legacy, not location, not what's going to be bulldozed, right? A location wasn't given in that report. And I absolutely would like to clear up that rhetoric with the community, because that's what we voted on, and I back it. So I think that the whole of South East Queensland, heck, the whole of Queensland has a lot to gain from Olympics legacy, and I want us to be part of that. And I think as a growing city, we owe it to the community to be part of that.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you for the clarification. Why do you think that this has risen up so heavily about the demolition of these things? Like, who started that? Why did that become a massive bit of misinformation that sort of rocked the community?
Oh, look, it's certainly something that needs to be worked through.
Yeah.
If the state government is bringing the stadium to Toowoomba, the state government will work through all of those issues, Tim.
Okay.
And I'm very, very receptive, appreciative to, we have some very old clubs in the vicinity of now the current stadium, but I really think that I'm asked to talk about legacy. The state government, it's their project, they own the stadium, they own all the land around it, or most of it, not the residential, sorry, but most of the big lands around it they own, and they're delivering this for Toowoomba Region. I absolutely think that we need proper consultation with those clubs, and I'll fight hammer and tong for it. I don't think we've got to that stage yet. Legacy, absolutely. Clubs in East Toowoomba, I really think they need to be consulted to the nth degree and worked with.
Okay, thank you for that. Just a couple of questions left. Well, we'll just leave it at the one question, I think. If there was one thing that you could say to electors to secure their vote for you now, what would that be?
To secure their vote?
Their vote for you, yes.
My one thing. Again, there's a zillion things.
If there's a zillion things.
How do I bring it down to one thing? Look, I'm Tim. I am a husband and a father to 4 kids, raising them in the southern suburbs of Toowoomba. I think we live in a really good part of the world. I love our city. I love where we're heading. I want to be a part of that. I feel like 4 years of being around that chair, I have learnt so much, and I now consider myself a learned public servant in local government. I'd love another go for 4 years, because you need to keep talking to the people of Toowoomba Region. What do you want from your city, from your elected representatives? Hopefully I've done that for 4 years. In fact, every day for 4 years, that's been my mantra, and I can continue to do that.
Thank you very much, Tim McMahon. Thank you for your time.
Tim, thanks for having me, mate.
Cheers.